Okay, folks, we're going to get started. I know it's been a long day today, lots of announcements, lots of cool technology and exciting customer use cases. I'm slightly biased. We're saving the best to last with autonomous agents. So strap in, and we're going to have a great conversation around what's happening in the worlds of agentic AI or autonomous business processes. To introduce myself, I'm Ray Smith. I lead the autonomous agents, hence the bias, within the Copilot Studio product team. Okay, and I'm going to be joined on stage later on by John Shen, who works at Suncorp, a customer and partner down in Australia, so all the way from Australia. So it's going to be his morning time by the time he gets on stage, so I'm expecting lots of energy from John. So to kick off, as I said, I know it's a long day. I usually start with a little whimsical kind of anecdote. This is me 25 years ago working on brain-computer interfaces and neural nets, so recurrent neural nets. And this was the height of my optimistic phase. I share this because what came next was my startup in around 2010, where I would call this the valley of despair for where AI was going in terms of its potential. And normally I'll get machine learning experts coming at me with pitchforks right around now. But the breakthrough that with LLMs was nothing short of staggering. And for the last couple of years, we've been basically reeling as a human race, trying to find all those use cases that we can use with this new technology. So 2 years ago, we started a journey to talk around AI moving from something that we'd interact with or some kind of back office algorithm to, or not just having conversations with, but real autonomous AI that it would run a process in the background automatically. Back then, people said, but it hallucinates. And like all good technology, it just needed a control framework and a new paradigm to sit on top of it. So we started a journey. We announced it in private preview this time last year at Build. And today, this is pretty much turned me into Ted Lasso. So every day walking in and out of the office, I tap that sign, not because I just think it's cool tech, but I get to see the great stuff that the customers are building with real demonstrable ROI, and that's what everyone cares about in the end of the day is business outcomes. So that's what we're going to talk today about. So what you'll walk away with today, what are autonomous agents or the full spectrum of agents? We've heard lots about it today. I'll touch on a couple of key customer use cases because, again, that's how we make it relevant. That's why when we talk about roadmap, we're going to talk about it in terms of the feedback from customers and obviously when John joins us on stage. And then finally, I'll finish off with a live demo going through a multi-agent solution in the insurance space as we work with a number of customers in this space. Sound fair? We ready? Let's go. All right. So to kick off, agents everywhere. If that is not obvious by Build this year, or even last year for that matter, they are everywhere. Every company on the planet are looking at how do I implement agents into our workflow? How do I implement agents into our existing traditional SaaS applications? So they are well and truly everywhere. But there is a spectrum where some are maybe making a simple call to LLM, all the way, so from basic RAG-based or retrieval-based agents, all the way to task-oriented towards fully autonomous. And the needs and requirements of those agents increase. The requirements around observability and governance, all these things we've heard around. So we're going to talk today about autonomous agents. Now, the tooling. Again, when there's agents everywhere, and you've probably been to many sessions over the last over today, talking around, well, how do I build agents? There's going to be many ways to build agents, all depending on your skill set and your kind of the preferred canvas and where you're going to create. It is going to shift to more natural language everywhere, as we know. The biggest programming in the world now is going to be natural language. So we're just going to speak, we're going to interact, and we're going to iterate, and we're going to build very, very complex solutions. But what has to underpin all of this is data protection, how we do the agent sharing. We do not need shadow IT, so we need to have complete observability over all these agents, all the policies, all the behaviors, and of course, tracking all that consumption across those agents. So we'll focus today on Copilot Studio. I share this just because I know people have seen M365 Copilot with the Copilot Studio embedded builder in there for kind of typical productivity workers building agents with really no code. We've probably seen the session beforehand with Azure AI Foundry, where we're in Pro Code, in Visual Studio, building very complex agents all the way back to bare metal with the frameworks. So we're going to focus on Copilot Studio, but the lines between all of these are seamless now because the capabilities are extended across the products. In Satya's session this morning, we talked about this shift towards more level 3, where agents will take on tasks and maybe not even like set up to be where we'll delegate the tasks. We will set them up to respond automatically to business events, inputs, database changes, emails received. So when we talk about autonomous agents, I share this slide, we're moving closer to this level 3. Yes, you can still have autonomous agents in level 2, but really we're talking about agents with human, obviously configuring it and setting it up, autonomously behaving and responding to an event. So, autonomous agents, that's what we're here to talk about. The fundamental thing is it has greater needs in terms of the planner, the orchestrator, the reliability, the observability. The main difference is it just can be triggered from any of those system or business events. So it's like a hook into a schedule or an API, and it will trigger automatically. So in terms of momentum, we're now at over 230,000 customers adopting Copilot Studio with over 1 million agents created in the last 3 months, so in the last quarter. That is, I think it's over 90% of the Fortune 500. So we're seeing an explosion in agent development, agent growth. So hopefully everyone in the audience is dabbling with agents. The first thing I will say is you really have to pick up whatever tools of choice, start building agents to understand this new paradigm. Quite often I meet customers and they say, yeah, I kind of got it, but then I went straight to the business case and the spreadsheet, and I was working through the use cases, but I wasn't quite sure what are the use cases that I would apply it to. So you really have to hands-on with the tooling to understand when to break free for this traditional deterministic mindset that we have of creating code, running from A to B. It's reasoning. It's like a reasoning engine, like what we as humans do naturally. It allows us to, it unlocks new ways for us to automate business processes. So we're going to talk about some use cases. The typical path for every customer that I've seen is going through that journey of, oh, this is kind of cool and it's powerful. It's not just RPA. This is a little different. And the use cases typically start with those RAG-based agents where, you add some knowledge, you ask it a question, you're like, that's pretty good. Then you're like, I'll add a task. I'll connect into ServiceNow or Salesforce, pull back some information. Again, conversationally triggered. And then they quickly, those HR onboarding agents turn to, well, what happens when the employee record just lands in Workday? Why not kick off the welcome pack? Why not kick off this automatically and to save all these people a loop? That's the typical journey we see. So a couple of customer examples here on the page, and we'll talk to real business value. So we'll talk about Dow Chemical as an example. So they've, I think, over 3,000 invoices come in via email. Needless to say, the biggest autonomous agent trigger today is email. A few months ago, that was nearly 47% of all autonomous agents were being triggered by email. So POs, invoices, AR, AP, you name it. We interact often across departments using email. That is massively reduced in the last quarter, down to about 17%, mainly because businesses are getting used to saying, hey, I can connect this to this custom API. I can connect to my internal applications, not just email. So with Dow Chemical, they were able to process all these invoices, check policies, look for discrepancies, and they were able to avoid having to do all this BPO work to look for overcharging and undercharging and basically discrepancies. So real savings. Another one I'll maybe call out, Simon, who was basically ahead of the game at Pets at Home in the UK, so a retail store, adopted agents very early on in the private preview and built a fraud detection agent, all around revenue protection linked to returns. And this is not just around saving money or more efficiency. It actually created a much better customer experience because their returns were coming through faster, because this agent was automatically able to detect anomalies and so on. So just a couple of examples, but the typical journey is gets hands-on with the tools, start with simple RAG-based agents, add in more connectors and tasks, and then shift towards more autonomously triggered agents in effect. So before I jump into maybe talking around some of the key highlights, some of the key features that we've announced today, I share this slide just as a kind of a placemat. There's no perfect definition in the industry around what an agent is or isn't, and there's lots of companies out there where they sprinkle a little LLM call here and there, and it's an agent. This, for me, is key. So, like, the definition I use in my mind for agents is it reasons, it interacts with its environment, so reasons over that data, comes up with a plan, and then decides how it's going to orchestrate aligned with that goal, how it's been set up. So that's really what an agent is. The key areas you'll have seen a lot of announcements today on anchor around how we do knowledge and RAG, so more agentic RAG, memories, tools, lots of tools. How many acronyms are on this little box here? By this time next year, it'll probably be twice that. So between model context protocol, computer use agents, prompts, code gen, the typical connectors and so on. So there's lots happening in this space. And then everything that requires it to be reliable, observable, auditable. So when we get into autonomy, it really touches on that last box. Okay, so we're going to talk from the eyes of our customers. So the early customers with us on this journey would give us very direct feedback, and we're going to share you the roadmap and the features that we've released in response to that. So it's kind of help anchor why we do these things that we do. So the first one was, and even before we get into the first one, the typical path for most customers, they sit in front of a blank page, and I'm like, go, build your first agent. And they sit there nervously because they're looking, you know, and I'm looking, and they're like, I want you to run my sales department, full stop. Okay, we might need a few more instructions than that. So it's like, this is what I mean by experimenting with agents, is you really have to get in there to understand how it works, the probabilistic model. Anything that's ambiguous you throw into those instructions is going to be ambiguous. I remember getting the phone call from a customer saying, Ray, I told you it hallucinates. Okay, pray tell, let's look. He's like, well, I added a SharePoint. I was like, okay, let's look at that SharePoint. 10,000 files, okay. You asked the same question twice, and it found 2 different sources. I was like, that's actually doing its job. So garbage in is garbage out. How you kind of index and curate all that information is important. But this one was usually the next learning that they arrived at, which was, okay, well, if I'm not going to just say run my sales department, I'm going to dump in like 20 documents, and I'm going to cram them all into the instructions. I'm going to add in 10 connectors. I'm going to bring it all together into this one Uber agent. No surprise, it doesn't behave reliably. So LLMs and agents, it's similar to us as humans, which is we need to create SMEs. We need to make experts to build or do one thing really well. So the approach most customers land on is, this is my process, break that up into parts, and I'm going to attack a part at a time. And sometimes they might start with, I'm going to have a human either side of that, because that part I can automate, and the human is also going to check it, make sure we've got like total confidence. And slowly but surely, you'll basically build a series of agents, and they'll stitch together. So for the last year, we've had customers who've been building these multi-agents. They've been doing a somewhat clunky workaround, calling it Power Automate to call back into another agent. But obviously, we announced today around multi-agent orchestration. This is not just key for modularity or best practices, or maybe everyone in the room here deciding, hey, you build that part and I'll build this part. It's all around the reliability. So building these SMEs is key to this outcome, to reliability. And I would say an important part of multi-agent is going to be interoperability. There's going to be agents everywhere. We follow that thought through, hundreds, thousands of agents. We see even across Microsoft, you've got Fabric agents, you've got Foundry, you've got M365. So interoperability across those is key. And then as these emerging protocols and standards, namely agent-to-agent from Google, we adopt those standards because it makes it easier for our customers to have these agents interacting. So we think this is a critical feature to truly tackle business processes. Up until then, it's been kind of, let's say, points in the process. So this is key. The next key lesson is every time we met customers, they were like, but I want a really fancy report. I was like, okay, you want a report, not just the output from whatever research has been done with this research agent. It was, I want it formatted, I want it optimized, I want maybe supply chain to figure out inventory optimization, I wanted to pick the best supplier, I wanted to do all these things. And we knew all this analysis and this kind of deep reasoning really required the reinforcement learning models, so the new breakthrough models. So both O1 and O3 was critical to solving these key parts in the process. So you'll see that as natively now built into Copilot Studio, and this really resolved a lot of those requests for RFPs, contract reviews, M&A, data room due diligence analysis, compliance checks, risks, because the reinforcement learning models really are they're optimized for outcomes. So it's not just based on verbiage, it's based on something that's quantifiable or can be calculated. And that's why they're awesome for these tasks. So that was critical. The next one, there's probably a few in the audience who have said, yeah, I've had this pain. So I see a few nods. So in the early days, we had all these connectors, and you could basically bring them in and say, hey, I want you to use this connector. Go make an update. And there was a few connectors that were super well described on the internet. Within the corpus knowledge of the model, it was like, you know, update new lead or pull new leads from this CRM, and the connector would just work because there was only maybe 4 or 5 variables that would need to slot fill and fill in. When you went to a more complicated connector, things more or less, you got the errors. And it was like, hey, I was hallucinating in here because I didn't know what variable to fill in. I didn't know how to calculate this. So all of these connectors, these complex APIs, needed a wrapper. It needed something to sit over it to make it readable by the LLM or more intuitive for these agent building. And obviously that became what we now know as Model Context Protocol is the best standard in the market for abstracting away from these complicated APIs and connectors. Even some at Microsoft, pains to admit, there was 40 parameters in one API, and we definitely needed an MCP server for it. But with this, it means for our builders, for our makers, you're more rapidly able to build solutions because we're abstracting across from that complexity. The next layer of abstraction on top of this is obviously agents to agents. And so instead of an MCP server, it'll be third-party agents that get built. So, next one. I've spent many times with customers sitting there. I'm like, I know you want to show a cool autonomous agent demo, but is this really an autonomous agent? Or is this really something that you should be making calls to the LLM? I could probably build that in RPA in 2 seconds. And I get it. That's kind of like, hey, I really want to show this new technology. The reality is there's going to be a healthy mix of deterministic code and non-deterministic reasoning in these solutions. There's going to be a time where you want, like the way we as humans have to reason over complex variables, and we reason over complex variables and have to decide which of the tooling am I going to call, in what order, to what do I do next. So there's a time and place for reasoning, but there's also a time and place to just go fetch, retrieve, automate, push, do this, simple tasks, more efficiently, more effectively, and obviously it's reducing down any of that variability. So what we've announced recently was agent flows built into Copilot Studio because we saw this as a natural kind of synergy to this agentic reasoning, is that you can build more and more tools, more and more automations that you will arm to these agents to get work done. So whether that's you generate code, whether that's running automations, whether that's you calling various services, there's a need for determinism so that you can accomplish those tasks faster, more reliably, and that couples with the reasoning as we talked around. That was another key learning. The next learning was, okay, I can't have a black box. I need to see what's going on inside there. I need debuggability. I need insight. When this connector fails, I need to know why. When I point a RAG or knowledge query at a source, I need to know which are the chunks that are being retrieved, why, what's being indexed, and so on and so forth. So we made this improvements around our activity stream, which you'll see in the videos today. It was a proud moment to see that at the backdrop of Satya this morning. But for each of these action types, knowledge, behavior, you will basically get an information panel that is fully extensible. We're seeing Model Context Protocol, the Kua team, they're all adding in more and more debuggability and information. So this is key for those multi-agent scenarios. So it's not, you're not just going to see the single agent you've called and then you have to navigate it away to another agent. You'll see all the agents called sequentially, and you'll be able to drill down into the parameters, the inputs, the outputs, and so on. So this is key. All right. I feel like at some point we should have had a clap. I feel like there was a lot in there. I feel like there's a lot in there. I think there's so little time. We spend so much time shipping all these things, but there's a lot. So with the agents everywhere, the number one ask from customers who are in production at scale, you know, in some cases issuing refunds to customers without someone even touching the transaction, is how do we have total oversight? How do we have governance? How do we control who publishes this agent, who has access to this agent, making sure there's no data loss, you know, so there's policies around all of this. The beautiful thing was we kind of started on this journey probably over 10 years ago with the citizen developer, with low-code automations and Power Apps and Power Automate. So controlling all of this citizen development was tooling that we'd built you know, over the last number of years. So we got to leverage a lot of that. So the team, great team in Israel, big shout out to them. They spent a lot of time looking across all our estate, all of our tooling, bringing it all together, making sure we centralize it so that it's easier for us in IT to kind of govern it, oversee it, drill down to the activities, see within the analytics plane what's running, what's not, and there's lots more coming around, you know, capacity caps at a certain level or in a certain tenant or within over a certain agent. So lots and lots coming here, and it's been a key ask from our customers. Okay. Next one, straight on to, okay, now that I've built an agent, now that I've got confidence, I can see what it's doing, now that I've got it running in production, how do I know that I go to my boss and say, see, aren't I awesome that I brought in these agents into our company and proved it out? So testing this at scale, but also measuring the ROI has been a key area of investment. And you've seen these in the demos today, all with these analytics, the number of successful runs where there was exceptions and handed off to a human, being able to see all sorts of attributes across the tooling, the different agents that are being called, the messages consumed, so the capacity, all of that is now shipping within the product as of today. So this agent health, understanding what it's doing, and for those that maybe saw the Power Apps, the oversight of seeing these agents to maybe delegate even the exception workflow after these agents can spit out saying, I wasn't sure whether I should proceed. I think there's an exception here which I want to kick out to someone for a workflow. So all of this is critical for demonstrating this ROI. And it is significant ROI. Anyone customer that's gone on that journey, you've transitioned from those RAG-based agents, action-oriented, you get to an autonomous agent, it means we start to shift to managing agents, doing lots of work on our behalf, which is a fantastic place to be. All right. The last one is to touch on this blurred lines now coming between low-code and pro-code. Makers are like, I want no cliffs extensibility. Yes, I want to get started in natural language. I want to be able to prototype fast. I want to be able to, let's call it the 80%. You know, you have the hairs on the back of your neck, 20% of the effort to get it like to this cool demo. And then you want to harden it for production. Then our customers want the flexibility of bring your own model, which we announced also today, the ability to go into an SDK, which we've also shipped and announced, and the ability to open that up in Visual Studio. Obviously, also with agent-to-agent protocol, the interoperability with any agents you build in Foundry, that's a key area we're working on as well at the moment. So this interoperability, the ability to generate code from natural language, we see as critical. We've seen, for those that have maybe played around with Prompt Builder or AI Builder, it's now built in naturally as a tool into Copilot Studio. And instead of just creating a prompt natural language, you can flick a switch in preview where it will generate code for you and securely save that code off, and it will run it like a service every time. So this kind of flexibility within Copilot Studio is really removing this no cliffs, so that even if it goes beyond the connector or you want to do some mathematical analysis or something kind of funky, you get to create a service by just describing it and it running in a safe container. And obviously then to bring your own model across both the prompts. We see this in the future going across various tools that we bring in, but obviously within the response generation and our prompt builder today, you can select various models, including bring your own model from Foundry. So one more, when there's a tsunami of tools and the business saying, hey, IT have asked for us to kind of accelerate with our kind of concepts and the use cases that we want to focus on. So they start to form these center of excellence with a mix of IT and business. And they want to get started quickly in those prototyping. So with all this range of tools, the key ask was, can you simplify this adding of tools, the configuring of these tools, so that we can, for the average business user that does not know how to program, that they can quickly add this and get to that 80% where they can go in with this POC to the IT and say, hey, I kind of built this in the sandbox, nice and safe. I actually think this is something we want to bring forward. So simplifying this actions and the configurations we've seen has been a top ask, and that's also released today. So huge win there for our customers. So next one is, next ask often is like, teach us how to fish. So we sit with the blank page. We start with, I want to create a sales agent, full stop, blank. They're often asking us, like, show us examples of these agent templates, particularly when we get to multi-agent. We get into the more complex autonomous agents. So there's a few agents that we're releasing into the templates around lead management, so qualifying leads, connecting to a CRM. With this new multi-agent, you'll be able to pick an agent that says, hey, this points at Salesforce, this one points at Dynamics, this one points at Oracle. So you'll be able to build your own solutions and configure them and tailor them as you see fit. And some of the other examples around invoice or document processing, as is a top use case. So all available from the templates. So lastly, on the customer feedback, we shared today around Kua in early preview or frontier access. And it was all around unlocking those traditional apps where we as humans have to push the mouse and interact with the keyboard. So without those APIs, we need agents to be able to interact with these VMs to accomplish those tasks. It also may be a browser if there's no API. So computer use agent was key to kind of interacting with some of those desktop applications that we know exists in all our businesses. So that's a cool ad. So I'll just kind of recap on this one. So at this point, I definitely expect a clap or an applause here. This is a lot. And just to be clear, it's not for me. It's for the team who've been working tirelessly on all of these features across a broad team and working across the breadth of Microsoft. These 10 features are honestly game changer, to the point where anyone in this room, I would say, there's no business process, there's no industry, there's no use case that I think agents can't tackle today because of these 10. Are they perfect? Probably not. We'll work in some of these areas, but the point is there's no use case that cannot be tackled with these capabilities today. So I feel like we've hit this inflection point of being able to tackle even some of the most gnarly financial analysis problems that we have across our business. So it really is important to us to listen to our customers, to get the feedback so that we prioritize our roadmap. And really, this is the point where I want to welcome on stage John Shen so he's an AI practice executive for strategy and governance at Suncorp, all the way from Australia, John. Thank you, John. And I'll give you that. And so he's going to share exactly the journey they've been on. And it's, as we know in our agentic world, it's not just about the destination, but it's the journey we have to get there. So I'll hand over to John. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Ray. Imagine you're a customer service representative in the contact center. It's day one on the job. And what happens is insurance can be complicated. Insurance can be challenging. There's all kinds of jargon. And our customers can get confused. So they'll call up and they'll ask questions about their insurance policy or about their claims. And your job is to try and resolve the situation for them as quickly as possible so they can go on with their lives. All right, call number one. Pick it up. Ring, ring. So, hi. I work for emergency services. Can I get a discount on my policy? Now you've got to resolve this situation. So the clock is ticking. It is a race against time to try and figure out what is the answer to this question and help the customer on their way. So there's sweat pouring down your forehead. You're rapidly typing, trying to find, where's the policy information? And then finally, you've got the details, and you can give them the answer they need, and you're done. Whew. But that's just phone call one of the day. There's still, 10, 20, 30 more of these? So let's rinse and repeat that process. This is one of the problems that we solved using generative AI that we've delivered over the past 12 months. Now, let me take a quick step back. Who am I? Why am I here talking to you? So to reintroduce myself, my name is John Shen. I'm an AI practice executive focusing on strategy and governance, working for Suncorp Group. And today I'll be talking about Suncorp's AI journey and our partnership with Microsoft that's helped us to get to where we are today. So for those that haven't heard of Suncorp, one of the largest insurers in the Australian region, selling products such as car insurance, home insurance, business insurance, and liability products. We have a portfolio of trusted brands which allow us to engage with different segments of the diverse Australian market. And we have a huge focus on sustainability and advocacy. As you may be aware, Australia gets pummeled by all kinds of natural disasters: floods, bushfires, hail, cyclones, storms, you name it. So sustainability and advocacy and resilience is a huge focus for us. When disaster strikes, we're partnering with government organizations to get people boots on the ground as quickly as possible so we can help communities rebuild houses, and allow people to get back on with their lives. We also have a focus on resilience. We've previously partnered with universities to understand what are the characteristics of resilient houses so that if a house is destroyed and we have to build it back, we can try and build it back better so it won't just be destroyed again in the next year when there's another fire. Now, it's probably no surprise that we're on a massive multi-year organizational program of change. And we've had a mature data science team. It's been in place for over a decade. So now, with our AI team, we've been focusing on delivering data and AI initiatives that support and augment human decision processes, are improving the employee and customer experience, and are managing our cost base. All of this is to serve our purpose: building futures and protecting what matters, supporting our customers and communities in their time of need. So let's loop back to the example I touched on earlier. If we think back to 12 months ago, when you had our customer service representatives on the phone and they wanted to find information, they would access what we call our knowledge repository, which would contain the procedural guidelines that govern what should our internal staff be doing when we find that there's a certain process to follow or they've got to answer a question. But the challenge was that it was difficult to find the right information in real time. So as I touched on earlier, you'd get the question from the customer. They would ask, OK, I work in emergency services. Can I get a discount on my policy? And the way it was set up was that the consultant on the phone would try and type in, oh, what are the relevant keywords here? Maybe it's emergency services, maybe it's discounts. So they'll type in a few words, keywords, and they'll pull up just a basic keyword search, and it gives you a list of articles. And you have to try and scan through, well, there's like 10 articles here. There's a description, there's a blurb. Which of these articles will contain the information I need to help me address this customer's query? So they've got to look at the list of 10, pick one. Hopefully it's the right one. Let me now scan this article. Oh, does it have the information I need? No? Oops, okay, let's go back to the list, find another article. And all of this while the customer's sitting there waiting on hold on the phone. So it's a hugely stressful situation, as I hope the example before illustrated. And in many cases, we found that our contact center staff would escalate to next level support instead of finding the answers themselves. Maybe it was too tricky and too stressful to find the situation, resolve the situation on the phone. Or maybe they just felt overwhelmed with so much information to try and read through and interpret and give a confident answer. And what we found is that there are almost 2 million customer interactions every quarter that could potentially benefit from having improved access to our knowledge base. So how do we try and address this problem? How do we solve this problem? We built a web application, RAG-powered, to try and answer these queries in real time. So what would happen is you get the query, emergency services, am I covered for insurance? And the consultant will be able to type that in to the web application, which will then trigger, of course, a semantic search to a vector database that pulls out the relevant chunks. We can then pass it through to OpenAI with the original question, and it will spit back the response and the answer. And of course, linking to the relevant sources so that you can go and verify and double check that it's giving you the correct policy information. So this tool empowered our staff to quickly find the answers they need with several key benefits. During the pilot phase, we observed there was a 50% reduction in escalations to next level support teams. And ultimately, it improved the customer experience hugely with faster resolution, higher accuracy of responses, getting fewer repeat calls, and making it much easier for staff to do their jobs. So everyone wins. And the feedback from our staff really shows it. Smart Knowledge was just one of the many initiatives that we've focused on developing this year. I'll just take a quick tangent, a quick side note. Another of our flagship products is something that we call Single View of Claims, which gives our claim staff a quick snapshot of what's happening on the claim, because it can be quite overwhelming. Again, thinking through the example of natural disasters, our staff have to manage tens of thousands of claims that have just flooded through, literally. And by looking at this single view, this single pane, they can understand what's happening on this claim, and also have generative AI to help guide them as to what are the potential next steps to progress the claim on its journey. To give a sense of the scale, to date, this application has processed over 3 billion input tokens and 1 billion output tokens. So it's a massive undertaking, lots and lots of data. Now, these two examples and more have only been possible thanks to a multi-year partnership with Microsoft. We're actively using Azure OpenAI, both pay-as-you-go and also P2Us, depending on the use case and the needs, to develop compound AI systems that are able to chain together tasks, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we've also started early exploration into agentic applications, where you have agents evaluating other agents to try and get higher accuracy on the results you're seeing. In addition to that, we're actively pursuing a democratization strategy, because of course, we've got our core AI team that's able to build these applications using Azure OpenAI and hooking up all the different components that are required. But we're also trying to put AI into the hands of all of our staff across the organization, whether frontline or back office. And so that's allowed us to roll out things like Microsoft Copilot 365 and GitHub Copilot. And again, there's been huge uptake for both of these tools. People keep asking us, hey, how do we get more licenses? Everyone loves it, being able to see the productivity benefits. So then the next step on the journey for us is thinking through, if I go back to what you saw from Ray earlier, the 3 levels of AI transformation, the vast majority of use cases we developed so far are in that level 1, where you've got humans working alongside AI as assistants. So now the question is, what does the future look like with agents, heading more into that level 2 and level 3? We're exploring how Copilot Studio might further enable the democratization of more complex use cases. And we're very excited to see what's the possibility of having low-code agentic applications, being able to orchestrate multi-agent flows, and of course, having appropriate guardrails and governance in place to make sure that you've got a responsible, sustainable system. Now, before I go there, I want to just give a quick couple of examples as what might this look like in the insurance context. Now, I see that there's huge potential for agentic AI across the insurance value chain, almost every single part of the process. Now, can I get a quick show of hands? Who's had an insurance claim that they felt went on and just dragged on and on and on for way too long? Anyone? Yeah, most of the people in the room. And sometimes that's the reality. Because for us as consumers, we think, okay, I'm dealing with a massive insurance company. They know so much about the insurance process. Surely they're on top of things. But then at the same time, from the insurer's perspective, they're saying, oh, actually, John, hey, you crashed your car. You want to get it fixed? Okay, perfect. That's fine. But actually, we're waiting for you, John, to tell us where do you want to get your car fixed? Do you want to go with speedy repairs over here, 1, 2, 3, or quality service, X, Y, Z over here, or whichever repair of your choice? So actually, we're at cross purposes. Customers waiting for the insurer to move, and the insurer is waiting for the customer. So what if you could have an agentic AI system or an agent that's constantly scanning to understand at every point of the claim, what's the information that's needed to push things along? What's the next key decision that has to occur? And if you do observe that there is something missing in that process, then let's actually proactively reach out to the relevant person, reach out to the customer, reach out to the supplier, reach out to the claim staff, whoever it may be, to say, look, there's something missing, please take action here, and then ultimately smooth out the customer process by proceeding onwards. Or as another example, quality assurance. We've got quality assurance processes in today, and I'm sure many of you in your companies do as well, to make sure that our staff are doing the right things and doing, performing high-quality services and meeting our customers' needs and expectations. But the challenge is that it can be quite expensive to run quality assurance because you've got humans that are looking over these processes, and maybe you're only auditing a small, tiny sliver of all the possible interactions that are occurring. So what if you could have an agentic AI system in place to allow you to really scale it up? So you can then monitor and audit a much larger proportion of your interactions that are occurring with customers. Make sure you're following the internal processes, as well as any external regulatory requirements. Because if you can do this, you can suddenly start to try and preempt, are things going off the rails? Is there a potential for a customer breach or of some kind? And if you can see these things early, you can intervene to get the claim back on track. So again, these are just a couple of examples, but there are many, many more where we can potentially apply agentic AI to support our customers and get better outcomes for them. Now, we see that the agentic AI paradigm has huge transformative potential if it's executed well. So I wanted to share a few early observations and thinking about what we believe that agentic AI needs to do and some of the key capabilities that will enable its success. At the center of all this is the concept of a master agent of some kind, which has oversight of the whole end-to-end process you're looking to automate and is working towards a target goal. Now, it's no good for this master agent to be sitting in isolation that can't do anything. Of course, one of the key considerations is, how does this master agent integrate with the rest of your ecosystem? Do you have access to data, to APIs, to sub-agents, to tools? And perhaps more importantly, what are the triggers that are going to kick off this master agent? Maybe it'll be that a new claim has come in, which then triggers a certain process. Or you've received a document from a supplier. Or there's an email from your customer. Or it could even be that nothing has happened at all. This claim's been sitting idle for 1 week, 2 weeks, because something has gone wrong in that process because we missed the communications. And so your master agent needs to be able to have that full visibility of all the different data sources so you can understand what's the right trigger or lack of information to get things moving. Now, this leads to reliability. Now, the question is, how much agency are you going to give your agent? Are you going to make it run a full deterministic process following step 1 and 2 and 3 and 4? Or are you going to ask it to actually, as the first step, have agency, use a planning agent of some kind? And there are trade-offs in each of these approaches. if you've got the deterministic approach, you can be more comfortable and confident that, yes, it's going to follow all the steps that you want, but maybe you're going to run into problems, as opposed to using an agentic approach where perhaps you can resolve more situations with high independence. The reality is that it's unlikely we can build an agentic system that can manage 100% of use cases in complete isolation, in complete independence. So how are you going to manage exception handling? When something goes wrong, how can you pass off, whether it's to a human, or maybe to another AI that's doing exception handling explicitly, to try and resolve the situation, and then pass back to your core flow to proceed and reset the process? Again, governance will be key. How do you get visibility and observability that your agents are doing the right things? They're doing the things you expect them to be doing. So do you have access to the data that was used to make the decision? And do you have access to the reasoning that was being applied in making those decisions? What auditing and logging exists so that if there's a challenge from a customer or from a regulator, you can actually respond to those challenges? Of course, we've all seen examples where it's very simple to build a toy model. You get a couple of agents here and there over a couple of cases. But over time, there'll be more and more of these agents scaling up across the entire organization. Thousands and thousands of decisions, maybe millions of cases you've got to manage. So is your platform able to handle all of that? And finally, maintenance. We know that the state-of-the-art models are constantly changing. Every month or even every week, the latest and greatest has been updated on the benchmarks. So what process are you going to put into place to ensure your end-to-end agentic system still works well when you've upgraded the models? This is just a quick snapshot of some of the interesting challenges that we need to overcome as you're developing and implementing agentic AI systems. But I'm very confident that we'll overcome these challenges, and therefore organizations will be able to reap the huge benefits through better experiences for our customers. So with all that said, we're really excited and happy to see the investments and developments that Microsoft's been putting into place in this space, as you've seen through all the different conversations today. So now I'm going to throw it back to Ray to give you an example and a snapshot of how might this agentic AI and multi-agent orchestration work in practice.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Thanks, John. That was great. OK, we're going to just jump straight into a demo. I think that's what it's all about at Build, really, isn't it? So just as I warm up a machine here, I'm going to quickly talk through the use case that we're going to demo live. And let me hit refresh here. OK, so we're going to do a claims processing agent. It's going to come in via a claims manager agent that's going to act as the kind of almost like the parent agent or the orchestrating agent. It's going to call off to a policy researcher agent where it's going to do complex, deep reasoning analysis across all those policy documents, the information that was submitted in the claim, whether it's police reports, accidents. Just to point out that this agent is a Contoso agent. We're working with a cohort or a number of customers in the insurance space. So this is just every insurance company is nuanced and different, but we're going to highlight something that's common or generic across them all. The next one is identity checking. Often when there's a claim made, it's like you got to check the ID, you got to check the registration of the car, you may even have to check a repair shop. We have this great partnership with Attentix that does ID and document verification and fraud detection. So we're partnering with us on an agent. And then a claim reviewer agent, so that's reviewing all this information to decide, what do I go back to the adjuster and say, should this be built or not? Or should this claim be approved automatically, or should it be reviewed by a human? And then obviously we update the claim, and we will come back if there's human review for exceptions. So that's the process flow. So I've warmed up the machine here, I believe. And there we go. I'll switch. OK, everyone see this? OK, so this is the claims, an auto claims manager. I'll zoom in to kind of help orient around. So we've got, obviously, the description of the agent. This is what makes it discoverable if there was ever an app mention from M365 or any various channels. You'll see the instructions. We cover this today, where you'll see the very kind of context-aware canvas where you / pick tools, pick instructions or other agents that you want to add into the context. So if people want to read that, your auto claims examiner, you're going to call this researcher, you're going to check Attentix validation agent, you're going to ask someone to do some deep reasoning and decide upon this decision. And then once it's complete, you're going to call into, you're going to update the claim, and then you're going to basically pass this in to a comms agent. Now, this is something that's very common in organizations. They're like, hey, when I want the final step to communicate, whether it's internally or externally, I want it to behave in a very similar way each time. So you give it a template, and we'll touch on that in a second. So you've seen knowledge, add various sources. I'll kind of whistle stop over that. You've seen all the tools you can add, the various tools that we've talked through today. Many and more coming. So from MCP, Kua, flows, prompt, CodeGen, you can keep adding. So this is a fairly straightforward, very similar to the slide you just saw. But if I drill down into maybe some of these more, these other agents that it's connected to, you can see this is the researcher agent. So it's got very specific instructions. It's got to go get the claim data from a database or a system. It's going to evaluate it in accordance with the policies. It's going to reason. It has all this. And if I open up maybe the insurance policies, the insurance policies here, it'll open up into this. And as a Contoso document with your typical complex automobile cover with all the, complexities that you would expect. Maybe to touch on, before I even jump into maybe I'll touch on the comms agent, just to give you a sense of that one. So at the very end, once it's decided on whether this is a claim that should be instantly approved because it's straightforward, it's clear-cut, with all the risk mitigations that insurance companies will want to build in, but if it's, it should be approved straight away, we as customers, we're like, hey, I got my insurance claim processed pretty quickly. That's a win. And then for anything else, it'll obviously be pushed to a human to review where there's further investigation needed. But we can see here where it goes off to get some comms templates to follow that standard. And then if the claim is recommended, my shortcut skills leave a lot to be desired, it will automatically send that email back to the customer to say it's approved. And you see just below it, if it's not approved, it'll go internally over a Teams chat to escalate for a workflow, and we'll show that in action. So why don't we just give it a whiz, and we can see it in action, and I can discuss it further. So we have a number of triggers here. This is a fake database or a system. It could come from an online application. It could come from an email saying, I've got a claim, and here's a photo, and here's my policy number. This is it's a Power App. It's sitting in Dataverse, but I'm going to re-trigger this particular claim. There's a couple of different variances I'll show in a second. So this is the claim reference that is being processed, and you'll see straight away it's off to the races. It's working. So it's gone from pulling back the claims data from this database system, the police report, whatever there was relevant to this. Now it's searching over the sources. So you'll see now this dynamic, information canvas where it's showing you what it's searching over, what information it's pulling back, and then it's going to start reasoning over this. So it's calling into deep reasoning with all of this context, with all the information that it was passed in as part of the claim. It'll, as we know with 01 and 03, it takes a little bit longer, so because it's thinking harder across all of this information. So we'll just give that a second. I can probably show you while it's running. Here's the information that came in from the claim via the various sources. Here's it's already jumping on to the next step. So we'll see here, it's now finished up with the reasoning. I'll come back in a sec once it's finished. It's called into the Authentics validation agent. Again, this is a partner, third-party agent where it was built via their APIs to call in, passing in an image for your driver's license, your registration checks, and also the repair shop. It's calling off and doing all these checks. It's continuing on into the decision analyst, which we'll see down below, deep reasoning. It's already finished on that. It was fairly straightforward. It's updated the claim, and it's now calling into this comms agent. So this is obviously an approval situation, sending that email. So this is now finished. Let me just go back through that, because let's get I'm going to step back through this so you can kind of replay it. And this is the beauty of like drilling into an activity for each and every run. You'll see the steps. You'll see the chain of thought prompt, when it called a certain tool, what it was thinking as it was going into each of these steps. So let's drill in a little more. So first of all, I got the claim data. You'll see in here the police report. This probably mimics what's sitting in the database in here. And we can already see that the update has gone back into this database. You can see here at the bottom, and I'm going to show you that templated update in a second. It has gone through the various sources of information to retrieve information. This is the main one that it found, which was the policy document. Open this up, which we saw. Close that down. And then it went through deep reasoning, where it came up with its decision, where were the risks, was it in accordance with the policy, passed that on into the Authentics validation. Let me zoom in there for folks, and you'll see that these are standard APIs. So it was an automation or an agent flow where it calls off, gets the validation checks completed, and then ultimately into this deep reasoning evaluation analyst. And then finally, it updates it back. And then into the comms agent, where we see it, and it sends the email, which I should be able to open. And we'll see it here. Oof, that was a moment. Oof. So, and when you actually drill down into these, you'll see the templates that it actually uses that it uses as part of kind of governing the control from that agent's template. So the key thing here is when there's a workflow, let me pick out maybe one of these where you'll see it's maybe needs investigation. I could probably marry that up with something where you see an opinionated adaptive card that's worked through, whether we use the approvals, workflow, or direct Teams injection. That will bring you then into that claims manager, where it'll give you a summary, give you the recommendation, and really expedite that process for the adjuster to actually assess that claim. For us as consumers, that's all a win, because we just expedite our claim being processed. But as we said, it's like the full rundown and deep kind of visibility into each and every active run. Now, what we saw here was see some of the analytics. Let me zoom in just to highlight for the team in Israel and the great work they're doing on the analytics. So we've always had analytics linked to conversational interactions, back and forth. Was this a happy interaction? Did we have, what knowledge sources were used? But now in the world of autonomous, we actually want to track successful runs. Where was the escalations or exceptions, and how did it behave? So when I open up the analytics page, you'll see here. So this is over the last couple of days. Kudos and shout out to the team and all the prep. You can see a lot of runs on May 15th. And we actually even forced a couple of exceptions as well. But the ability to drill into your billing, to see where messages are being spent, see the details of the run outcomes, the usage, the tool use, and so on. So really giving all this control back to us, not just in IT, but also as business owners of this process, to really drill in on how it's behaving, what's the ROI, and so on. So I think one thing I want to just touch on last before we finish up is really, as part of, I'll skip over that. You saw that. That was a live demo. That was the backup, just in case I needed it. So really, my big push would be getting the hands on the tooling and building these agents. As part of our team and our customer success team, we have a series of programs. We have a number of sessions. We have lots of labs today. I encourage you all to get the fingers on the keyboards, because it is an experience to build these agents, to understand what they're capable of and how it's going to be transformative in your business. All right? Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.